When I often think of forgotten games, sometimes this game Tiny Tank comes to mind. And I remember the game being fairly decent back in the day. But looking at the reviews that was given for it, it seemed to have been given a mediocre score. And I wanted to know if that score was actually just, or if this is really just an underrated game. So as I played through this game, there was a few things that I noticed that maybe is underrated, maybe is overrated. So let's dive deeper into this and see if this game really deserved better or worse praise than we remember. Now, the story isn't a terrible one. I mean, it takes place in the past and the present. Essentially what they're doing is they're showing you the past with these CGI cutscenes, and then the future is just some over voice bot telling you that you have to save the planet. And the CGI scenes, really all they do is they lead up to the big moment when the planet is starting to get run over by all these robots. Speaking of robots, they have all these good AIs and crap in them, except this robot is a bit of a smartass. Kind of reminds me of like Gex or something like that, except they were trying to overuse vulgarity. At times it works, at other times it didn't. And I think there was just their biggest selling point was just the vulgarity. As you travel, more or less, as you travel level to level, you just see more and more of these CG scenes. And it's pretty much the same thing. The director's yelling at Tiny. Tiny says something back. He calls him an asshole. I mean, just listen to some of this. I mean, I giggled a few times, I have to admit.
A cute killing machine? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. What is up with that tinky? That's the most mealy-mouthed bunch of crap I've ever heard in my life. I can't believe that came out of my mouth. Somebody shoot me.
And then other times, it seemed like their gags in the CG scenes went on way too long. Like they're always picking on this guy named Fred, and this one, I honestly thought my game was frozen or skipping when this just seemed to go on forever.
You get me? Up to here. Tiny?
And it was narrative things like that that I honestly didn't mind playing the game to see. And then there was a few instances in the game where they seemed very far and few between. But overall, I think the story is fairly okay. I mean, it's your standard save the world type crap. Oh, and if you were to die, well, you see this nice game over screen where the world is destroyed. Now, the gameplay I thought originally was really fun. In the beginning, I was actually having fun blowing shit up, moving around, collecting weapons, destroying things. And then as the game went on, it seemed the gameplay started to change. Everything started to become more linear. You started being more restricted of where you could go. The areas shrank. And the smaller the areas of the arena, the harder it was to actually control the damn thing. I felt like the controls started to get clunkier the more precise you had to be. And then there's just some levels where you're on conveyor belts and or you have to stay on a certain thing. And this is where I ended up finding myself getting stuck a lot of the times. By stuck, I mean I had to literally reset the game in order to figure out what the hell I had to do because I was stuck on certain levels. One of them was this conveyor belt area where you were on basically you're on these pieces of metal, but you can't just land on them. You got to destroy one just so you can get off this conveyor belt, and you have to sit on one that's cool so you can move on to the next level. I was stuck here for a good half an hour trying to figure out what to do because the game really wasn't exactly telling you what you could do. And because you were magnetized to it, you were stuck to this thing, and it was kind of hard to jump, move. The worst part about it is the level, once you were done with it, if you could accomplish it, you could be done with this section within 30 seconds. It was one of those things where it was almost unnecessary that they even had it in there, because it was just, okay, you did this thing, then boom, another loading scene. It's really, they couldn't have just skipped that part. there's just sometimes that they force certain gameplay elements in there that I really didn't like. Also, there was this ice stage where you had to jump on these ice platforms in order to make it across this quote-unquote frozen lake, and the game tells you when you die, saying that there's chunks of ice you can land on. But every time I've tried landing on top of even one of those or moving across it, my guy just sinks. And I mean, the one time I just ran across it and I seemed to do better before I just sank, which was really bizarre to me. But at the same time, I didn't understand why those were there in the first place. And half the time it didn't work. I ended up using a cheat code with this that you can type in, a feather code, so it was light as hell, so I could just glide over all these sections. It honestly was the only way that I could complete this without actually losing my freaking mind. And speaking of cheats, I also put on in the invincibility code the prior level to the ice level, because there was this section where you're getting zapped for standing on these tiles, and it destroyed me. I had to restart that section like 4 times before I put on the invincibility code. It was really long, really stupid. You had to be like a platformer kind of puzzle. You had to land on the switch, and half the time you jump on the switch would activate, then you jump on the switch again by accident, then deactivate, then you jump on a blue square, get zapped, and then the door closes, and it went on and on and on. So when I did finally make it to the boss, this is where the invincibility code became useless, because they switch your heads, and then I ran around for probably 3 or 4 minutes straight trying to destroy myself, but I couldn't destroy myself because of the invincibility code. But even though the other tank had my head on it, I couldn't destroy the tank part. I had to destroy the head part, and I couldn't even destroy that, and it just went on in a loop. I ended up honestly putting another cheat code and then skipping that level, and that's how I ended up with the ice one. And if the game itself didn't already kind of have an identity crisis of what kind of gameplay it really was, with the end of this ice level, you ended up having to ski or slide, or almost like they wanted to pretend like you were snowboarding down this mountain thing while blowing shit up, because you kept moving, so it was kind of on rails, but it kind of wasn't. It felt like you were almost like snowboarding or skiing in some way. Also, because you had to jump over these jumps, and if you don't, you died. And I didn't realize that the first time, I died in a hole. But yes, you have to jump over these jumps, and then you're like skiing, sliding back and forth, and I don't know, some things in the game just seemed very out of place, and like I said, it almost seemed like this game was having identity crisis at that point, because you'd done free roaming, you had done the linear, you had done, platforming, and now you're doing this. And where I ended up giving up was we're on this railgun stage, and you have to go a certain miles per hour. You have to get up to a certain speed, and you have to use this boost thing or whatever to get past these boost traps or whatever the hell it was. Well, the problem was, if you used it too much trying to get past them and blowing shit up, once it runs out, you're stuck. I was stuck. I couldn't advance after that, and my only choice was to reset, try again, and by this point, I was already 3 hours into the game, way longer than I probably should have been, and I just kind of gave up on it, and I ultimately didn't finish this game again. I just couldn't get through it. My frustration level by that time, from the gameplay being what I thought originally started out as, I had a lot of fun with it, to, okay, I'm not liking this, to even other things, like you couldn't, just jumping the platform that you have to jump on at the end of every screen. Why did they have you do that? Why couldn't they just end it? There were some stages where you end the goal and then the scene cuts. Then there's other stages where it's like you have to go back to this platform, but even getting onto this platform was a pain in the ass, because you're trying to jump on it, it's not jumping, it's not going on there the way it should, or it looks like you can do it from this side, but you can't. You have to do it from the other side. No matter how much you're jumping on there, holding it, you just can't get on this damn platform. And sometimes it seemed like it was too much, they put way too much thought, or they overthink this whole thing where you have to go back to this platform, which makes no sense, because there's points in this game where the platform shows up out of nowhere, and then there's points in this game where the platform just completely disappears and is no longer needed, and the whole thing just felt, as the gameplay went on, I felt like it got worse. In the beginning, the first few stages, yeah, it's fun, the desert, and then you destroy the one boss, and all of a sudden, as you progress through the game, it was like the actual gameplay and level design got worse, and it just seems like they rushed this product out the door. Another thing is, his one-liners get really annoying because he starts repeating himself. There was this one scene where I was shooting something, And he said the same thing over and over and over again for literally 10, 15 seconds straight. I couldn't explain it. Now, the soundtrack was one of those that I actually found was one of the most enjoyable things about this game. I mean, the soundtrack does kind of bounce around all over the place. It really doesn't have a rhyme or reason, but it's like you're listening to a radio station. And Tiny will actually, like, his left and right or treads or whatever will start bouncing up and down, jumping along to the beat, and depending on the music, he never comments on it, but I mean, aside from the music, they'll have like talk show elements where other robots will call in and they'll talk about getting Tiny Tank and how he's disappointed they haven't killed him yet. And I don't know, the soundtrack of this game I thought was fairly fun and just sometimes funny. It was just sit there and just listen to it and listen to like this talk show going on where one of them's complaining that he's rusting and he says once the atmosphere is gone you won't ever have to worry about that, and just other little things. And there's someone who's like a vacuum cleaner who's upset that he's a vacuum cleaner, silly little things like that. But the soundtrack overall I thought was probably one of the most enjoyable, if not the most enjoyable thing of this game overall. Now, as I stated before, I was always wondering if this game was underrated or if it was like one of those hidden gems. After playing it, I have determined that, in fact, it is not underrated. It is, in fact, in my opinion, overrated depending on who's reviewing it. The PSM gave it a solid 2 out of 5. And actually, they downgraded that when it was originally a MGM Interactive game before Sony got their hands on it. That's not a good thing. And IGN gave it a 6.8, which is really weird. But if I was going to rate it out of a 10 scale, I'd rate it at a solid 5. The game's not horrible. The game's not great. But if you've seen this one on your shelf and you decide to pass by it, I'm not going to pass you any judgment. This is no hidden gem. The game is what it is. If you want to play it, cool. If you don't, you're not missing anything. Thank you so very much for watching. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification to be notified whenever I upload new content. I'm always uploading new content, sometimes twice a day, sometimes 3 times a week, sometimes 7 days a week. You never know when I'll drop new content. So hit that subscribe button down below and hit that bell icon to be notified when I drop my new content.